Welcome to the Inside Out podcast. I'm your host, Jojo, and this is where we will navigate the mess together. That is mental, emotional, and spiritual. Let's get messy. Hey everyone, welcome back. Welcome if this is your first time. Well, we have a very interesting conversation. I'm joined today by Jakob Gricar, who is a somatic practitioner and transformational coach. And we are going to dive in. We're going to get messy. We're going to get real. And hopefully we're going to address some things that, not a lot of us probably address unless we are in therapy. So this is going to be your friend to friend, and you're going to be the other friend in the room listening to this raw and open conversation all about trauma. So let's dive in, let's get messy. And Jakob, welcome to Inside Out.
Thank you so much for having me, Jojo. I'm so stoked to be here.
I'm really stoked that you are here with me. And I guess the first thing I just want to know is, when the word trauma comes to mind, what do you think of?
So trauma is not so much as what we generally think of as in something that happened, right? It's more so looking at what did we adopt in our nervous system as a result of being in that state of dysregulation. So what happened inside of us, what got imprinted inside of us, or what happened in our mind-body matrix, aka our nervous system, that we still now react from. So a lot of the times when something happens, we tend to imprint it in the moment, in our psyche, and we relive our life, our entire life, from the perspective of that still happening. As an example, somebody who was in a car accident, a car crash, for example, whenever they hear loud noises or screeching of the tires, they might just go straight back into the accident, into that instance. And the body reacts, right? Even if the conscious mind, the psyche, is not fully aware of what's happening, the body still reacts. And that imprint inside of the body, that's what trauma is. That's what traumatic imprint is. Less so of the accident itself, or abuse in any way, or relationship, or what happened, right? But more so, how did we react and what got imprinted in us as a result of that?
Trauma is really easy to just define as a word, right? And we might think, okay, so we need to work through this trauma. And I think there's a way to, do that in talk therapy, or a lot of people, say, well, this is what happened and this is my experience of it. But I don't know, even for myself, if I've ever really gotten to the other side of like how to work through that. And what is really fascinating about your work in somatics is how to really get that out of the body, because we don't know that it's still there until something triggers that. So how do you really work with people or yourself, or what is your experience with somatics to really like get that out?
Here we're going into the real questions. So it's a bit of a complex process because it's nuanced to the individual experience, right? So from my personal journey, I don't have any major big T trauma as seen by the Western psychology, and this is where things can get pretty messy when we just look at it through the lens of like traditional textbook psychology. And the other side of the spectrum is where in the pop psychology on Instagram, you can hear the term trauma just being thrown around like crazy, right? It's like, oh, that relationship was traumatic. Oh, that thing was traumatic. Oh, that conversation was traumatic. And it all becomes about like somebody being in that identification with their victimhood state, being caught up in the state of quote unquote trauma, right? But in reality, the space of working inside of that is so nuanced because it's so individual. So what happens to one person might not be traumatic to another one. For example, if and we can go straight into the densest parts, right? If we look at sexual abuse or physical abuse or anything like that, when there was the ability, the opportunity for somebody to be held in that and had the space to be fully in the process with someone post-event, to be heard, be listened, to be encouraged to express all the emotions and all the processes about it, oftentimes it doesn't get imprinted in the psyche, it doesn't get imprinted in the body, it doesn't get imprinted in the nervous system. For a lot of people who have experienced a form of abuse, not being witnessed, held, basically acknowledged in it is just as traumatic, if not more, than the event itself. So this is where we get into like the nuance of working with that, which is you really need to understand what's one's individual real traumatic imprint, right? Not just what happened, not the event, because there's no textbook way of working with it. It's more so, what about it did we make that mean about ourselves? What did we make it mean about the world? What did we make it mean about man or about woman or about a certain race? And then we work through processing that. And in terms of the somatic work, what we do is we take people into the body. And going into the body, in the simplest explanation, means tracking the sensations that are there, not the stories, because the mind wants to go into the story, right? It wants to go into like, okay, what are you noticing in the body? Oh, I'm just so frustrated that happened, XYZ. No, that's not what you're noticing in the body. What you're noticing in the body is like heat in your chest or in your stomach, tension, contraction, heaviness, tightness, pulsation, tingling, whatever that is. And then when we sit with these uncomfortable things, it often opens up a story, and our body takes us to a memory or the imagery where oftentimes things have gotten suppressed as well. And interesting, on the other side of the spectrum, we see how much we as humans do to not be dealing with the things as they arise, and how much we're wanting to escape. And this is where addiction gets born from. This is where numbing comes from. So I'd say the opposite of the work that I'm doing is the numbing and the addiction. So when we look into how to actually process that, is one, you gotta stop doing the things that you're doing to numb. Not in terms of going cold turkey on all of your addictions, but seeing the addictions. And I say addictions in a very broad term, right? Everything from substances to sex to porn to watching Netflix to binge eating to scrolling on Instagram. Not going cold turkey on that, but just seeing that is in essence a nervous system regulation strategy. We are doing that to soothe ourselves. So if we were to not soothe ourselves, what would be there? And as we sit in that uncomfortable moment, we often see, oh, there's grief that I've never felt. Oh, there's pain that I never felt. There is something that I haven't allowed myself to fully be with. So there comes this escaping into everything else, right? So this work is really tapping into what has not been felt, allowing it to be fully felt, fully expressed, and then seeing where does it take us. And again, as I said, I've had people waking up to suppressed memories from when they were 5 years old, people waking up to their birth trauma and remembering their birth trauma. Just when we slow down enough, when we actually learn to listen what's there, subconscious opens up with memories, with imagery, with all these different things. And that's where we can really start this work.
There's so much avoidance though that comes with that. Like no one's like, oh, I'm excited to get uncomfortable.
I wouldn't say no one, but it's definitely not a common experience. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even when you were talking, I was like, oh my gosh, wait, getting quiet, like that sounds crazy. Turn off the music, turn off the podcast, like really sit in what that uncomfortability is and like what comes up. And how do you find that people really come to you? Like, is it from this is a last resort, or they're processing something, or like how do they get to the stages of let's deal with this?
It's oftentimes the people who have done everything else, because when you get into the space of going into personal development, and I'm going to speak very personally here from my experience too, my first thing was, let me see how much I can learn about this, right? So then we get into personal development, digesting, ingesting, consuming as many courses and books and programs as we possibly can. Then maybe at some point when you learn enough programs, you also realize, oh, I can become certified in this and I can teach it as well, right? Whereas underneath the learning, the taking another course can just the same become an addiction in itself. So whenever I start feeling uncomfortable with myself, I go for another course, I go for another program, I go for another ayahuasca ceremony, right? And I see this over and over again. And then some people go directly into therapy. They're like, okay, there is something inside of me that needs to be processed, that needs to be healed, that feels broken. So let me go to, the talk therapy. Majority of the talk therapy, this is not talking shit about that. There's deep honoring of talk therapy as well. And majority of it will not take you very far and very deep, because the way it is made, the way that it's structured, and the origin of talk therapy as well, coming from Freudian analysis of people just being inherently broken, right? If we look at who Freud was studying in the first place, it's meant to keep you inside of the coddling and the validation. So because of the clinical guardrails of talk therapy, the therapist isn't actually allowed to call you out on a lot of things. It's not allowed to confront you and tell you that what you're doing is actually not okay. So a lot of times when people come to work with me, they're often done a lot of talk therapy. They've often done a lot of ayahuasca. They've often done a lot of different courses. A lot of them, majority of them actually, are certified in some sort of healing already. But nothing has ever gotten them to that depth. And again, this is also the reason why a lot of people don't come here before, is because it's so confronting, because it's going into the deepest parts first and having to be with all those dense, sticky places that most people are avoiding.
Do you think that it's possible to get to the bottom of a specific trauma without guidance from a practitioner such as yourself?
Yeah, anything is possible, right? Anything works if you work it. Is it likely to happen? No. Is it common? No. But is it possible? Yeah, definitely. And this is where there's a trap inside of the personal development space, right? Which is the way marketing works is, if you convince a person that the thing that you're doing is the only way to have something resolved in their life, it's very easy to sell to people. So a lot of people studying different modalities and creating businesses around it, what they're doing is they're trying to tell you that this is the only way to get into something or through something. So what I'm wanting to do is the exact opposite. Yeah, actually, there is a possibility for you to resolve all of it on your own. Is it likely to happen? Likely not, because it does take a lot of years and a lot of like really deep, rigorous work. And I know for myself how much mentorship I had invested in, how many therapy sessions I have invested in, how many ceremonies I have been in, how much facilitation I have done, how many courses I've participated in. And as I look at all of that, it's the accumulation of me just learning it all on my own, right? And all of that could have been compacted in a couple of weeks if I would have just worked with the right person. So the question isn't if somebody can do it, it's more so, why would you? Why would you do it on your own if you can cut on 20 years of trial and error by working with somebody who's gotten there?
I completely agree. So you're saying this can be transformed and changed in a matter of weeks? What does that process look like?
Well, it depends. Again, it's going to be very individual, right? So I've worked with people who have had pretty intense abusive situations happening, right? I've had a session. One of my clients, we had one session and she felt complete and we stopped the working relationship. It was one of the most traumatic things that you can ever imagine. And of course, I'm not going to go into the details of this. But it was just going directly into it, processing all the parts of shame, guilt, feeling like, it's that person's fault that happened. Then it was also allowing the anger and the boundaries to be expressed, allowing the body to resolve and come to the resolution as the body needed to, not as I wanted it to or she wanted it to, but more so allowing the body to complete the process on its own, which resulted in a lot of like shaking, trembling, just deep nervous system repatterning. And then on the other side, there was no imprints left around that. Now, that doesn't mean that the event was forgotten, the events. However, it does mean that the person is able to function without constantly being in the repeating of that event. So I can remember all the things in that have happened in my life. And as I look at some of the most challenging moments of my life, for example, dealing with chronic skin condition, being homeless when I was 19, being robbed with machetes and left in the middle of desert in Argentina, um, all of those I can look back and I'm like, wow, those are some of the best things that have ever happened to me. And they inform how I work with clients and how I live, the energy, the groundedness that I have inside of myself, the conviction and the faith that I'm able to walk in. And that would not be possible without those events. So I have not forgotten what happened, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no imprints in my body that are still wallowing inside of the story of victimhood. I don't look back and look at, oh, poor me, that happened to me. I'm more so oriented towards like, this is in service not just of me, but it's in service of life right now.
What does a session look like with you? Because with somatics, it's body
Mm-hmm.
and it's not talking. So for someone who doesn't know what it even means to be a somatic practitioner, what is like that process like?
So generally, it does involve talking in the way that there is guidance. And what I aim to do is with every single client, tapping into the space where we're no longer operating from the conscious mind. So we start with the tracking of the sensations in the body, and then seeing as you sit in the things that you're likely avoiding, what it opens up. And when a memory pops up, when an imagery pops up, for example, somebody would come to a session. I don't work with one-off sessions anymore, which I'm happy to explain why. But in my clients, when they come into the session, they would come with, okay, this thing happened between me and my brother, or me and my partner, or whatever it was, and they think it's about the thing, but the problem is never about the thing. It's your thinking about the problem that's the problem. It's your experience of the problem that's the problem. It's your trigger and the memory inside of your psyche, inside your nervous system, that's the problem. When we look at like the things that are suppressed and repressed, they're generally not the things that you're aware of. So when we relate to other people through our projections, through the things that have happened to us, for example, if somebody has had an abusive father, they might develop a resistance to authority, or a really controlling abusive father, right? They might just be looking at everyone who is in the position of authority as their abusive father. And then there's this controlling projection that comes onto other people. So I'm listening to that, and I'm not just listening to what the client is saying, but I'm listening to where they're saying it from. Is it coming from the activation, the trigger, the traumatic imprint? And when I catch that, we trace that. And that oftentimes opens a series of memories, right? So I'll just keep going with the same event. So there might be a memory around another person that was in authority position. Then when we take that even further back, there it might be a memory with an ex-partner who was also very controlling. Then when we take that even further, there would be a memory that would start opening up with the father. And then oftentimes it would go to the core memories of the things that were deeply imprinted in the developmental years. So once that opens up, what we do is we allow all the emotions to be there, or the experience to be there, the experience that has never been allowed to be had, right? For example, if there was like fear or anger, but anger was not okay to express because anger was punished. That happens with the majority of my clients are women. With majority of the women that I work with, the anger doesn't it was not allowed to be expressed. So then there's like the sadness that covers it, right? So every time they would say like I'm angry, they would start crying, and I pay attention to that, right? So pointing them as well to that awareness. Notice when you say you're angry and then you start crying, and as that opens up things inside of the body, then we're like, how does the anger actually want to express? And sometimes that's going to look like pushing, screaming, yelling certain things. And in the same way, if there's sadness that didn't get to be expressed, that is likely going to be tears or deep grief or the collapse in the body. And then we allow the body to go where the body goes. And when it's that deep, deep, deep safety that can get created inside of the space, the nervous system starts recalibrating, repatterning, or re-architecting itself. And that can often look like just shaking, trembling, heat, like people start sweating like crazy, or they get like really cold. It's like the body temperature changes. So then we just allow that to fully express. because there's often a thing that happens in the activation as well, is we see our body going into the process and we stop it because we need to be in control, right? We need to have our shit together. We need to be strong or whatever that is. So instead of doing that, the opposite of that is letting the body fully complete the experience. And when that occurs, the body just naturally resolves it. And it resolves at such a deep level that in the conscious mind, sometimes it takes still a couple of weeks to integrate the fact that this imprint is no longer there. Because we tend to operate from these imprints. And we tend to have behaviors that come from these imprints, right? So then as a result of that imprint no longer being there, then the behaviors, the way we relate to other people gets to recalibrate.
You do this work in person, or is this mostly through Zoom, or how does this, because I know you have a very nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah.
So what is that like for you or for your clients?
Majority of my work is online. And this is really the beauty of this work as well, is it can be done online. Some of the work happens in person, and there's even deeper layers of this work, which are, there are certain points in the body that can be held in order to activate the sympathetic states, and they basically allow a person to bypass the conscious mind.
What does that look like?
It looks like a person laying on the massage table and having points held in the back of their head, between the occiput, the sternocleidomastoid, and the trapezius. There's like little points. When held in a specific way, they tend to activate the sympathetic state and take people into the subconscious mind. There's also different points that are closer to the heart, and some points on the feet that work with different organs. So whenever there's a traumatic imprint stuck in a specific part of the body, when the energy is not moving, we can work with those as well in person. But the online work is really powerful as well. And the most powerful thing about it is that anyone can do it. All you need to do is find somebody who can guide you through the process, right? And the beautiful part about this work is, like, at some point, you can learn to do it on your own. Things start clicking, and you start understanding how all of that happens inside of your body, and you can guide yourself through different processes. It doesn't take that much to learn that, right? And this is also where I was sharing with the therapy as well, as the exact opposite of that is therapy does not have an end goal to it. It doesn't have the end point to it. Whereas once you've processed certain deep things from the body, you can see the vessel with which you be in the world is so much clearer. And then all these things start appearing very small in front of you. You're like, oh, okay, there's this big business thing that is happening, or a big relationship thing. Let me just work through that, through my body. What am I actually noticing? What am I feeling? How does that want to express? And just allowing that freedom to happen inside of your system.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about victim mentalities and how the word trauma is kind of thrown around very loosely in social media. And again, I don't want to discriminate against people's traumas, because trauma is obviously a very deeply rooted and painful thing to process through. But to the other point and the other side of that, it is very loose. And how people sort of process trauma can, I don't know, I feel like I see all these manipulation tactics and all these things that you're seeing on social media of how to bypass certain things when it comes to business, or get the girl or get the guy in relationships. And it sort of just feels like it's like that quick fix rather than dealing with what's really underneath it all. And I'm wondering if you can speak to even just the pain points or the blockades that keep us from expanding in our careers or getting into healthy, sustainable relationships, and what it really can be to build that from a place of true alignment rather than just grasping at straws.
Yeah. And on that point, there's a topic that tends to ruffle some feathers, which is a very unconventional belief that I have, which is nobody really knows how to work with trauma. Nobody really knows how to do anything, actually. If we just backtrack, majority of the people just kind of have the idea that comes from very loose theories. If you look even at the deep certifications, right, the world-renowned certifications, what are they based on? They're based on very loose understanding of human body or human psyche. And if you go deep enough, if you go far enough, and you look at the origins, nobody was certified to actually teach any of it. So the brain and the complexity of the brain is so nuanced that when people say, okay, this thing is going to resolve that, it's just not like that. It's not that simple. When people are saying nervous system works this way and not that way, again, it's just not that. It's not that simple. So when it comes to trauma and working with trauma, the world recognized trauma informed way is to validate one's experience, which is really powerful, because one of the things that hasn't happened majority of the cases when a traumatic event has occurred is for a person to be fully seen, acknowledged, validated, held in a safe space with it, and that's why it gets imprinted in there.
And do you mean in the moment, or do you mean the aftermath with someone else if that trauma is reignited in a way?
Right after, generally.
Okay.
So, for example, if we look at, I'll give a case of molestation, for example, one of my clients that I've worked with. There wasn't actually a traumatic imprint with her, with the specific man. It was the imprint with the mother. Because when she came to her mom and told her, like, hey, that happened, her mom would say, no, it didn't. You're making it up. So the more traumatic thing was mom's way of reacting to her. And a lot of things can get processed very quickly and easily. It doesn't matter how intense the situation when somebody's being held inside of it. That's what we do as practitioners is we create that safe space that wasn't there when the person needed it. That's why you can look at somebody having the deepest, darkest, most adverse experiences, and they're fully through with them. They have nothing around them. They don't wallow in the victimhood inside of it. They don't keep repeating it. They don't keep reenacting it, because oftentimes they had a model of how to allow that to be fully felt, fully expressed, fully worked through, right? So
Beautiful.
the reason why I'm saying this is because the trauma-informed way is always to be inside of the validation of one's experience. But now the question is, and where I'm kind of going against that, is this actually the best, most loving thing to be with a person in, right? If somebody's coming consistently wallowing inside of their imprints, would it be more of service to call them forwards into who they could be, or just validating them in the experience that they're having? And this is something that I keep seeing, and the reason why I'm sharing this is because when something has happened, we create an idea about the world, right? So a world is a bad place, and the world is unsafe, and I need to fight to survive, for example. So then everything I do in the world is in order to confirm those beliefs. So I go out and look for relationships that are going to reaffirm and validate my view of the world. One of the most beautiful things that I've seen that a majority of the practitioners or therapists don't do is to not validate a person's view of the world, to actually call them forwards in a different view of the world, while still holding them in the safety and the validation of, like, allowing to have that experience that they've had. The experience is valid, yes. A person's reaction and their experience about it and how they perceived it, it's valid, yes. And not to validate their view of the world, not to let them play small because of the victim story that got created inside of this. And when that happens, when you were saying what is in the way of us playing like a bigger game, let's say, in the world, right? Creating more abundance or like more loving relationships. The major thing that I would say is the stories that we create inside of ourselves as a result of that. So if I was never allowed to express, for example, or express my emotions, a big thing with men that I've worked with, we're taught that we don't feel, right? It's not okay to feel. You know, you're a pussy or whatever when you're a guy and you cry, right? Just deep emasculation when the emotions are present. So when one is being taught not to feel for the entire developmental years, what one does as a result of that is to create a persona that all they do is to show how strong they are. So then we've got the machismo and the patriarchy and the people trying to assert through control and try to minimize others so that they can feel like they're that strong person. So when we relate to others from those imprints, we never get to know other people. We never actually know who the people around us are. We actually don't know what the world is and what the world offers because we keep relating to it through our projections of those experiences. So when it comes to money, for example, and the expansion, one of the biggest things is what are the stories that you created, not just in your mind, but in your nervous system about being wealthy. Money is the root of our evil. Other people have this, but we don't. It's because you're white, black, Latino. Is it because you're a man or a woman? Is it because you have an accent or because you're not pretty enough? Whatever those things are, they get imprinted so deeply. And the part of the somatic resolution of that is looking for those stories, those beliefs, and allowing them to be, again, resolved at the level of the nervous system. And same with relationships. You'll never be able to really know the other person that you're in a relationship with when you're working your stuff out. When you've not dealt with your relationship with your parents, every relationship will be about your parents. When you haven't really looked at what are the things that are running you, you're going to relate to other people through how you perceive them to be, not who they really are. So let's say, somebody doesn't wash their dishes or take out the trash, and you're immediately like, that's because they like, I don't matter, right? It's like, I don't matter enough for them to do that for me. You're not actually relating to them and their experience. You're relating through your traumatic imprint. So whatever we're looking at, whether that's money, relationships, business, whether that's working with clients or being in service, the first thing that I always look at through the work that I'm doing is what needs to be excavated so that I have a clear vision, so that I can actually relate to the world and not just relate to the world through my lens and my trauma.
I want to flip this on its head for a second, because I think there are also the people that are dealing with the trauma, and then the people, let's say you're in a relationship, who have the partner that's going through the trauma. Maybe that's being projected onto them, or it's like the same relived story. How would you approach a situation like that, or tell or guide someone through being on the receiving end of a partnership?
Yeah. And that's an interesting one because it takes two to tango. So I was in plenty of relationships that were not healthy in any way. And I think the easiest thing to do when you get out of an unhealthy relationship is to point the finger at your partner, ex-partner, and just say, okay, it's because they were a narcissist, or because they were weak, or because they were projecting, or because they haven't dealt with all their childhood stuff. But then the question is, why did you get into that? And why did you stay for as long as you did? So having that as a mirror is also a really interesting place to be, right? And breakups, relationships ending are some of the best places to work from. I've had one of the most intense experiences last year, going through one of the most heart-shattering breakups I've ever been in, and that was one of my biggest teachers in my entire life. I went deeper through that process than I did in dozens and dozens of ayahuasca ceremonies, because I finally allowed myself to feel the things that I've never felt, because I finally got to look at the parts of me that I've been avoiding. And one of my teachers used to say, don't waste a good breakup. And
That's funny.
inside of that, we get to look at, like, okay, what are our patterns? Like, really, where can I look at myself? So the first thing that I would say to a person is, like, looking at yourself. Your partner might be dealing with some stuff. Very, very likely, most people are. And where are you responsible? Where can you take on responsibility of where you're not setting the boundaries? Where are you betraying yourself, and why? Where are you going along and being in agreement but not in alignment? What is the attachment that's the reason why you're still being inside of the thing that you know is not working? And if you're operating purely from love, which is very rare, but you're like, okay, I just simply love that person and that's the reason why I'm here, then yeah, it does take two people to work on something. And when you're getting into a relationship, you're not just bringing yourself in this moment, you're bringing your past and all the things that have happened in the past. You're likely bringing into the relationship your relationship with your parents. You're likely bringing in all those old things that haven't worked out with other people. So it takes two people to work out through something as well. And one thing that one can do in the relationship is just ask yourself, how loving can I be? So if I see my partner being in a massive process and being triggered, and I know that it's not about me, how loving can I be? Instead of defending, deflecting, arguing, rejecting it, rebuking it, trying to push it away, saying like, that's not me, just saying like, okay, your experience is valid, and just loving them in their experience. And then also at some point, seeing, is this actually working for you?
I really like what you said about how loving can you be and how can you show up, really. It's interesting because I too was in a very tumultuous relationship for a while, that this person had a lot of past stuff that they almost projected onto me, where I showed up in a way that it was like, yeah, but that's not me. And how do I support you through this? But it was almost like they never really let me due to the past experience. So that created its own sort of way in myself where, yeah, if I look back, it's like, well, why didn't I just leave earlier? Which was very possible, but it was almost like I needed to prove the love or whatever it was for that person. Now being out of that, realizing how much there is of me that's like suppressed and shut down from that past relationship. And now it's almost like working through how not to be that way moving forward. And it's interesting because, like you said, we're all coming with baggage from the past. And it's like, there's this quote, I don't know where I saw it or who it's by, but it's like, everyone has baggage. Are you going to leave it in the middle of the room and just keep tripping over it? Or are you going to start unpacking it together? And the beauty in building a relationship and love is unpacking it together and having those vulnerable and honest conversations about, where you're coming from and maybe why. And maybe it is necessary to explain to your partner your past. Maybe it's not. I personally have always thought like it informs a little bit more and also maybe takes the power away when you are able to open that up, where someone obviously like, don't do it if it's going to be held against you or it's an unsafe place, that it's going to be weaponized against you in like a future fight or conversation. Do it obviously with discretion, or if you need to, or don't do it at all. You would know you're in that relationship, but there's a duality there, because it's like you want to show up with love. You also have your own stuff, and how that dance really happens with vulnerability and also stuff that's happened in the past that maybe that person's doing that you didn't even realize was an issue, but because they're standing in front of you, it's like, oh wait, shoot, like now I really have to address this, and you're the person I need to almost like address it against, because that's the mirror.
Mm-hmm. So many things come up as you share that. So firstly, when you were saying, why didn't I leave earlier? And why was I still in there? There's always a corresponding traumatic imprint, and there's the psyche that keeps reliving the same thing because it wants resolution, right? So somebody who was raised in an abusive household and never heard "I'm proud of you" or "I love you" is going to chase abusive relationships in order to have a different experience. And psychology looks at it as like neurosis, but in reality it's like the psyche just wants the completion. So one would put themselves in another abusive relationship so that they see if they can make a difference, right? with each person that is exactly the same as my father or my mother or my brother? Can I have them validate me in the way that I wasn't validated? And that just keeps happening until in some way or another it gets resolved. And a lot of times the resolution of that is just learning how to walk away and choosing yourself. And with a lot of my one-on-one clients, and this is a very confrontational thing, but a lot of them do tend to leave their relationships or their businesses, and not as a bad thing, but as seeing that what they've gotten into, they've gotten from a deep traumatic place. And once those things start getting resolved, it's like either the other person is on the same team and they're going to grow with, or the business. I had one client who, after the first session with me, ended up closing down her pretty big coaching business. And it was because it just wasn't aligned. It wasn't something that was like fueling her with life. And it's confrontational when you get to see, oh, where have I been operating from this whole time, right? And then the second part inside of that, you were saying, just unpacking it, and like, how much do we share the past? I've always been under the impression that you share your past as much as you have to in order to inform the future. And if it's not relevant in now or in the future, you don't, because it's just unnecessary. Nothing that like really moves you forwards or like it is present and needs resolving doesn't need to really be shared. And in terms of intimacy and vulnerability, it is very vulnerable. And if somebody is weaponizing and using what you're sharing against you, you're likely not in a very good space, and probably should not be there. But looking at the vulnerability can only occur. Intimacy can only occur at the other side of the vulnerability, but vulnerability means that we put ourselves in the space that we don't know exactly how we're going to be met inside of it. If I share something very vulnerable with you, and I know for a fact that you're going to react with just, like holding me with lots of love and, just validating me in my experience, that's not real vulnerability. That's performing vulnerability. That's sharing something, knowing how you're going to react. The real vulnerability is like, hey, here's my heart. What are you doing with this? Like, are you going to take it? Are you going to reject it? Are you going to let it hang? Are you going to embrace it? And only after vulnerability is being met by the other person, it does open the intimacy. And a lot of people are chasing the intimacy without being in the space of vulnerability. But vulnerability is like, hey, I have done this, or I've been that, or this is how I felt, or this is what I'm experiencing, and not knowing how the other person's going to respond. So it's an interesting play to look at that when unpacking something with a partner as well. Are you unpacking it so that you perform vulnerability in order to force the intimacy? Are you just sharing something from the past because you want to be met with compassion or empathy or something? Or is it something that you're like, hey, this is like, oh, this is raw, this is vulnerable, what are we doing with this? And this is where the real intimacy gets created. And there's obviously there's ways that it can go very wrong depending on the gender dynamics, but just kind of like in general, it's like putting that raw version of you out there and speaking into it, like, hey, this happened, and like, this is why, like, I got the most vulnerable things are really when you notice yourself being in the wrong about something, when you project on another person and you get to take responsibility, when you show up in the way that's not it's not in the highest alignment with who you want to be, and then you get to express that and own that, and you don't know how they're gonna react, right?
There's a few things you said that I'm just like processing through right now. And one of them is true intimacy is made through authentic vulnerability. And that's so, I guess, I don't know. It's like it can be forwards and backwards, because you can say that both ways. Like vulnerability equals intimacy and intimacy equals vulnerability. But one way is actually going to be more authentically aligned. And I really like what that really just hit for me. And maybe that's hitting for someone else or our friend in the room listening. So that's one thing. And the other is about your highest expression and doing something where you're like, this isn't right. Like, this is not how I want to show up for myself or this person or in this situation at all. And then kind of accountability and ownership of that. That's very, very powerful. And I think that can be very, I don't know, what's the word? Like, not vulnerable. There's another word for it, but maybe let's use vulnerability. That can be very vulnerable to be like, yeah, I screwed up. And I don't think a lot of people are comfortable with that, which I think creates a lot of these push-pull dynamics and toxic foundations and relationships and deflections and blame. So yeah, thank you for breaking that open. And I guess I just needed to iterate that back because it was very profound hearing it from a different lens.
Yeah, it's a very humbling experience. And the thing is, when, and an invitation as well for whoever is listening to this, see how often you are so attached to the identity of being right that you come up with so many stories and justifications just to maintain that level of being right. And something that I've done that in so many relationships, that's why I can speak to it in such clarity as well, is you build an entire story, an entire personality, an entire argument, an entire thing just around like that one thing when you don't want to acknowledge that you were in the wrong. And I've known that I've done that a lot in the past as well. And the humbling part is just learning to see that and to just actually voice that, like, hey, that wasn't actually right. I can see who I was being. And it's not so about what you were doing, because the doing doesn't really matter, but it's like where it was coming from. And if you can really tune into like who you were being in that moment, I was being jealous, I was being aggressive, I was being it's like a little kid throwing a tantrum, I was just being judgmental. If you can look into that and then you own the actions that have occurred as a result of that, that's one of the deepest accountability one can take, because it's putting yourself in a humbling situation where you're like, oh yeah, I did that, and I'm willing to take responsibility, and I'm willing to be responsible for it. This is where a lot of healing can happen in relationships, in life, and something that less so from the somatic and more so from like transformational coaching and like the dialogue, where that comes through is when one really starts looking through their life and constantly seeing, where am I walking out of integrity, where am I speaking out of integrity, where am I manipulating and playing games, where am I trying to get a different outcome, but I don't say it exactly? Where do I have unsaid expectations, right? Unsaid expectations are premeditated resentments. It's just looking at...
Whoa, that's a good one.
It's looking at all of the things that are, unspoken, that are unsaid, that are like just tiny little ways of trying to get your way. And adjusting that and owning that, like, hey, I can see as soon as it happens. Once you get like really good at it, you just do it as soon as it happens. Like, oh, I see, I just reacted from a different place. I'm not super happy about that. Like, I was being really upset right now, and I was being upset because I felt like, it was touching on my survival wound that has nothing to do with you, and none of this has anything to do with you. I'm just feeling this right now. And once you start clearing your relationships like that, you'll see also the people who come to you, the people that you attract, are going to much higher caliber, because it's a different level of conversation when you're not just bickering around like the small little games. And the money conversation becomes different. The business conversation becomes different. I noticed that when one of my businesses started growing a lot, and we decided with my business partner to hire an operator. And we noticed she was super tapped in. She was always there, like early. The reports were always done properly. The way she was operating was just so like structured. And that's how we operated in our business. And just looking at that, what felt really good was that we didn't have to have those small conversations about being on time, for example, about, and you can see these little conversations that need to be had in order to just have somebody somewhat meet you. In relationships as well, they're very damaging. If you need to be with your partner the whole time, just telling them about like why one needs to be faithful in a relationship, the relationship's not going to be creating something beautiful. And one of the mentors that I follow a lot, Alison Armstrong, she says most of the people aren't playing a big enough game in the world to have a partnership. So looking at a relationship, like, are you actually playing a big enough game to need to have a partner? Majority of the people are not.
When you say a big enough game, what do you mean by that?
It's just looking at like, what are you creating in the world? What are you up to? What is your business? What is your purpose? What is your devotional service to the world, right? What are you creating in the world? And if you look through majority of like the current entrepreneurship ventures, at least with the people that I've worked with, in terms of like my clients, they feel like they want to do it all on their own. And it's like, it's my business and I get to do it on my own and I want to do it on my own. And there's just so much of like needing to do it on your own. When you see people who are extremely successful in what they're doing, they're generally in partnerships. So if I want a big business, I'd rather have a small piece of a big pie than a big piece of nothing, right? So I'm looking at, who do I partner with that is complementary to what I want to create in the world. So that's more of a business perspective. But now let's take that back to relationships. What are you doing in the world that is big enough that you need two people for? And that's where you can like really, really look at like the games that you're playing, the conversations that you're having. If you align with your partner on your faith, your devotion, your purpose, where you're going, on the big things in the relationships, right? Like values and money and family and all of that. A lot of other little conversations don't even need to be had, or if they are had, they're so small that they're not causing big arguments. Like the conversation about like being on time, the conversation about like how do you want the dishes or the trash or the cleaning done. When you're up to a very big game in the world, those conversations don't even tend to happen, because you're like, okay, what can I do in order to support my partner? What can I do in order to provide as a man? Or what can I do in order to serve as a woman? Or how can I like honor and like nurture? Or how can I just like give and protect? So the conversation becomes very different, and it becomes about like, what can I give as opposed to what can I take?
It's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking, wow, all of the big blowouts start with stupid stuff from my past, like past relationships. Mm-hmm. It was like the dumbest little things that should never have been anything. And now it's those conversations aren't even on the table. It's like we've never had those conversations. Like it's not even on the brain. Whereas like the stuff that is on the brain is stuff that's like, oh my God, this is very vulnerable. This is very intimate. This is stuff that like I almost want to run away and suppress. But every time that I go against my nature and I don't, it's being met with such, so far, just love and support rather than, oh, you're being too much, or like deflection, or like making it my fault, or so very interesting.
And when you say a lot of conversations were about the small stuff, I want to challenge that. It's never about the small stuff. It's about what that makes it mean. What the person
masked
makes it
as
mean.
The small stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I had a whole breakup happen around like the conversation around yogurt. And unpacking that all the way back, right? What does that represent? Like, where does that go? Like, how is one person feeling about all the things that have never been expressed, and now it's coming out in these odd ways, when the resentment is like building behind the scenes, and then there's like a tiny little thing, and like you forget your clothes somewhere, or you forget to put something in the fridge, or you forget to go to the store, or you miss something, or you say something wrong, or you say something that could be interpreted as upsetting, and then there's suddenly like floodgates of resentment that just like open up. That's all those things that have not been expressed before, like the actual vulnerability, right? So the intimacy is like poisoned by all this resentment that is being held in the back. And I see that with a lot of couples that I work with. It's how many things get unsaid. And when one can, whether that's a business partnership or a romantic partnership or friendship, when one can meet all the ways that there's divergences happen, and like not making each other wrong, but just kind of start seeing like, oh, does this still align? How does this align? How do we come back together? How do we work this out? How does that happen, right? And just looking at having those conversations, those are the couples that tend to make it the longest, as opposed to the ones who just tend to brush things under the carpet and pretend like it's not happening, and then it blows up through different resentful conversations around the quote unquote smallest things.
Wow, we went in a lot of different directions. Okay, Jakob, before I let you go, I want to get messy, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So mentally, trauma is this big word. How would you first advise someone to deal with that label?
First thing would be just looking at where are you functioning from, and what is your life looking like before the label even comes in. Where are you being reactive? Where are you being upset? Where is your life not looking the way it could? Are you waking up feeling excited, happy, joyful, or are you not? What are the things that you're doing that you're dreading doing, that you're avoiding feeling, avoiding being with? And as you look at that, starting to go into what's the story underneath. So starting to really like uncover what the triggers are like in your body, and starting to uncover what are the beliefs that are there. Because again, like a conversation about a yogurt is never really about a yogurt. A conversation about the dishes is never really about the dishes. So the further you can go in asking yourself, what am I making this mean? The more it's going to inform you with what is happening underneath. And I like to completely let go of the word trauma and just see, okay, there's a belief that is there. There's a need that wasn't being met. There's a experience that has happened. There's some stuff that is still stuck in my body. And then from that space, it stops the identification with it. So it's no longer I have trauma, and I have just like the intense ownership of the trauma that most people want to go with. But moving more towards like, okay, there's this belief that I created. Is this serving me? There's this need that I didn't have met. How do I meet this need? There's this thing that feels stuck in my body. How do I move that energy? There's this emotion that's never been felt. Let me just feel it. Let me just be with it. Oh, there's this younger version of me who really just wanted to feel love and feel held. Can I hold myself in that way? So just removing the trauma from there, and like looking at what is really underneath. What is underneath all those behaviors and all of that.
Beautifully said. Emotionally, do you find that there's a specific emotion or mask emotion that presents first before the deeper, real story is lived through or felt and processed through in the body?
Absolutely. Not a particular one. Again, it's a bit more of a nuanced thing, but you can look at yourself and see what is the thing that you're experiencing the most. Do you tend to be really sad all the time? Do you tend to go towards the depression? Do you tend to go towards just being angry at the world? My assertion is that that's not what needed to be felt and experienced. That's the cover-up for it. In one of the trainings that I've done way before even meeting my current mentor and going on this path, they call it a primary repression, which is we tend to repress one of the two things, either anger or sadness. Boys don't cry, right? Makes me an angry man. Don't be angry makes you a very sad woman. Obviously, the other way around can also work. But for a majority of the women I've worked with, the anger wasn't allowed to be expressed. It wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to set your boundaries. And boundaries are really, anger is just boundaries in motion, right? So when we look at that, it's like, okay, if that wasn't safe to be expressed, and it's much safer to cry, then somebody moves towards just like crying and feeling sad all the time. So when we look at that, less so of like really allowing that to be something we consistently experience, more getting curious of what's underneath. And the same with like the stories that we play, right? The yogurt or the dishes. It's like, what's the belief underneath? And the same with the emotions. What's the actual like thing that's underneath? And a lot of people would say, I'm so angry, but then they would cry. And that also like informs that there is like the expression of anger, for example, isn't allowed to be had.
Spiritually, are there any tools or takeaways that you can sort of impart, whether that's like breath work or like how you really like do tap into the nervous system? Is there like a spiritual sort of lens in which, besides mentally and emotionally, you can sort of like get your way through, if that makes sense?
Yeah. If somebody isn't meditating yet, I would just ask, why aren't you? When even if you're the biggest skeptic in the world, just go Google some research or ChatGPT some research on it. There's no reason why you wouldn't be meditating. The reason why I bring it towards meditation is when I was 14 years old, I had a chronic skin condition since I was 8 years old, and it got completely healed through meditation, which is a whole nother story. But as I was doing that, there's a technique called Vipassana, which is basically just tracking sensations through the body. You go from the top of your head to the bottoms of your feet to your toes, and you just pay attention to the subtlest, smallest sensations in the body. It's completely non-dogmatic, and it's just becoming aware of the body itself. This is one of the first stages of that meditation practice. And inside of that, something happens when you realize you have sensations. Or even more, you don't even have them, they're just there. And then you realize that the same thing happens with the thoughts. That you're not your thoughts, you have the thoughts. So if you don't have your sensations and they're just there, they move, they're fluid, you don't really own your thoughts and you're not your thoughts, they just come through and most of them aren't even yours. And then you have these emotions that come up, and if you try to locate the emotion in your body, you might be able to, like, okay, there's some pain in my heart, right? But then the more you're with the emotion, the more you're going to see it moves and it transforms and it like changes into something different. So that's fluid as well. So where's the identity and where's the I? So who's the one that's actually observing that? If you're not the sensations in your body, if you're not the emotions and, the emotional body, if you're not your thoughts and your mind, then what's the observation of it? Who's the observer? Who's the I? So spiritually, I would say when you can see that you are the awareness itself and not the observer as an identity, it liberates a lot of different things because you no longer identify yourself with belief systems, with traumatic imprints, with broken relational patterns, but you let yourself just observe it all. And that allows for it to be in safe enough space to actually be processed all the way through. Because one of the biggest things that happens in this space is it's the repression and suppression of a specific thing. It's like, okay, I can't allow myself to feel hatred. That is dark. That is bad, So then I push it away, and what you resist persists. So when you create a space where even that is allowed to be here, knowing I am not that, but that is here, knowing I am not that thought, but that thought is here, knowing I'm not that sensation, but that sensation is here, even if that's pain and, tension and like itching or whatever it is, just allowing it to be there oftentimes completes it. It allows it to be brought into the space and be met with love and not judgment. So spiritually, tapping into the space where you become the observer of your entire experience, not just the things that you want your experience to be.
That was such an amazing answer. I think meditation is one of those things, especially for me, that is difficult to get into. And also just the question of like, well, what does that even look like? So I've been challenging myself a lot more lately to just do it and try, even if it's a guided meditation, even if it's just, like watching the breath or whatever, because, I don't know, it's an interesting journey. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so many people get caught up in, I don't know how to do it, therefore I'm not even going to do it. And not to open up another whole topic, but earlier you were saying there's so many people teaching how to just have strategies for business or like strategies for dating, like this is how you pretend to be a high value man or woman to attract your partner. It's all strategies as opposed to just being. And in the meditation, it's the same thing. When you're looking for a strategy as opposed to just being, you're going to get caught in the something that is not authentically like really being present. Meditation is about presence, which is, can you actually be with the thing that's here? Even when you're talking about the emotion, right? We're talking about the grief. Majority of the people who learn about processing emotions and somatic work and all of that stuff, they learn that they need to be with their emotions. So now I be with my grief so that the grief goes away. Am I really being present with the grief? If the only reason why I'm being with it is so that it will go away, it's in a way, it's a form of resistance to it. So we want to look at like, if I let go of the desire and the attachment for a sensation, emotion, expression, for any of that to go away, that's when we become like really deeply present with it. And the same with meditation. When you look for a strategy on how to meditate, you're not meditating. You're not being present, right? If I look at how to express myself the most vulnerably, I'm in the strategy of vulnerability. I'm performing vulnerability. The vulnerability happens when I just be inside of that unclear, uneasy space. So that's why it's been so hard to define for majority of the spiritual teachers out there and people who are talking about meditation, right? Because it's so loose. You can't put the strategy on it, and that feels unsettling for the mind that seeks the meaning and the strategy. So the opposite of that is, can you be in the space where you don't know how to do it? Can you just be present with the fact that you don't know how to do it? And that's more of meditation than majority of the people are doing.
I think all of those things that you just said is really cracking open the paradox of surrender and what that really looks like. Jakob, Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today. And where can people find you?
Anyone can find me on my Instagram or my website. They're the same name. So just my first and last name, Jakob Gricar. .com is my website, and Jakob Gricar is my Instagram. So shoot me a message if you're listening to this and you enjoy what I'm talking about. Just send me a DM, say that you're on here. Don't be a stranger, ask questions. I'm always in there answering all of the things myself. So and when I have different offerings, I tend to just announce them on there as well.
I love that. And all of this will be linked in the show notes. And you guys know where to find me at _insideout.podcast. Also on Substack, again, linked in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, take a minute, think about 3 people who could benefit from this and send it their way. And with that, I will see you all next week. Have a great week. Bye.